When you remove yourself from someone's life, you stop being their emotional safety net. People don't usually feel the loss right away. It sneaks up on them. At first, they enjoy the space, the freedom, the quiet, but over time, that quiet starts to sound like emptiness. They realize the conversations aren't as meaningful, the moments don't feel as rich, and something is just missing. That something is you, but they won't realize it if you're still filling the silence. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply step back and let that space speak louder than your words ever could. Reflection doesn't happen when someone is distracted by your presence. It happens when they're forced to sit with themselves, when your voice is no longer the background to their life. That's when they start thinking, really thinking, about what they had and what they did with it. Without your input, there's no emotional buffer, no comfort zone. They sit in their own decisions, their own silence, their own consequences. And that's where growth begins, not just for them, but for you too. You're no longer managing their emotions, you're letting them manage themselves. We don't often realize how much someone adds to our life until we feel the vacuum they leave behind. Your absence is not just a pause, it's a mirror. It shows them the emotional weight you carried, the way you held things together, even when they didn't notice. When you were there, maybe they felt in control, but without you, the imbalance becomes obvious. They have to face the truth of who they are without you by their side. And that's not something you can explain to them. It's something they have to experience. Let the mirror reflect without interruption. Space can feel uncomfortable, especially when you're used to being the one who gives, explains, and reassures. But discomfort is a necessary part of emotional clarity. The distance creates a vacuum where truth has room to breathe. It strips away the noise and distractions, leaving only what's real. In that quiet space, people are forced to feel things they've been avoiding, things they couldn't face when you were there to soften the blow. You stepping away isn't cruel, it's clarity by design. When you're not around to smooth things over, they feel the tension of their own behavior. Maybe they dismissed your feelings, maybe they didn't make time, maybe they took you for granted. In your absence, all those things echo a little louder. And those echoes are hard to ignore when there's no one else absorbing the fallout. They replay old conversations in their mind, noticing what they missed. They wonder why you're not reaching out like you used to, and that wondering begins to sting. You're not punishing them by leaving space. You're giving them a chance to confront what they've avoided. Most people never get the opportunity to reflect because someone is always cushioning the impact. But when you remove the cushion, they feel the full weight of what's gone. And it's not just the loss of your presence, it's the absence of your love, your energy, your investment. That kind of absence lingers because it's attached to something meaningful. The kind of connection that doesn't just fade away with time. Your presence was powerful, but your absence can be even more impactful. Because it's in the absence that people begin to reevaluate their choices. They start asking the hard questions. Why did I let her go? Why didn't I try harder? Why did I wait until she disappeared to realize what she meant? These questions don't come in a rush. They build slowly, over time, until they're impossible to ignore. And they don't have easy answers. That's the beauty of space. It forces people to go deeper than they ever would in comfort. When you take yourself out of the equation, you stop giving them someone to lean on emotionally, and that's when they're left with only themselves and their reflection in the aftermath. Without your constant effort to make things work, they're finally left with the reality of what they gave or what they didn't. And in that stillness, with no distractions, they start to see clearly. Not because you told them, not because you begged them to understand, but because silence has a way of saying everything that words never could. We live in a world where it's easy to take things for granted, especially when they're consistent. When someone shows up for us every day, gives us love, care, attention, we get used to it. It becomes background noise, something we expect without even realizing it. But the moment that presence disappears, everything shifts. Suddenly, what was once overlooked becomes obvious. The attention they used to brush off starts to feel like a luxury. And now they're left wondering how they didn't see it sooner. Value isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes it's subtle. The way you listen, the way you make someone feel understood without even trying, it's in the little things. checking in, remembering their preferences, showing up when no one else does. These are the things people don't know how to measure until they're gone. When you leave, you take all that quiet consistency with you, and that absence leaves a mark, because now they're comparing what they had with what's left, and what's left usually feels empty in comparison. When you were there, they may have thought they had time to fix things, to show up better, to appreciate you eventually. But time doesn't stretch forever, and neither does patience. The moment you stop showing up is the moment they start counting all the times you did. They start remembering your kindness, your effort, the way you forgave what others would have walked away from. The very things they overlooked now become the things they crave. But craving something in hindsight is not the same as cherishing it in the moment. Sometimes people confuse availability with permanence. Just because you were always there doesn't mean you always will be. And when that illusion breaks, it's a shock to the system. They start to realize how rare it is to find someone who actually shows up without being asked. That realization doesn't hit until they look around and see that no one else is doing what you did. That's when your true value starts to hit them, not because you changed, but because you're no longer there to give it freely. It's human nature to overlook what's familiar. Familiar love, familiar support, familiar presence. But just because something is familiar doesn't mean it's not valuable. And when it's gone, that's when the mind goes back and replays everything. They remember the way you loved them even when they were difficult. They remember how you made them feel like more than enough. And in that remembering, they start to feel the weight of the loss, not just of you, but of the version of themselves that felt whole with you. True value doesn't scream. It doesn't need to prove itself. It shows up day after day and creates a kind of emotional safety most people don't even realize they need until it's taken away. When that happens, they don't just lose a person, they lose a sense of security, a version of peace they didn't know they were depending on. And that's what makes it so painful, not because you were perfect, but because you were real in a world full of people pretending. People think the wake-up call comes when something dramatic happens. But sometimes the loudest lesson comes in the quiet, in the way they miss your voice in the middle of the day, or the way their phone feels too silent. They start to notice the emptiness where your presence used to live. The support they didn't thank you for, the love they didn't match. And with each day that passes, the gap between what they had and what they feel now grows a little wider. You were a giver in ways they didn't even understand, not because you were trying to earn love, but because that's who you are. And the tragedy is, they only see how rare that is once they lose access to it. They only realize what they had when they can no longer reach for it. Not because you disappeared, but because you stopped offering what wasn't being valued. And now they're left with the echo of everything they once held in their hands, but never truly appreciated. Sometimes the most profound lessons aren't taught through words, but through distance. When you create emotional space, you remove the comfort of being constantly available. It forces the other person to face the emotional consequences of their choices. Not in anger, not in spite, but in clarity. You're not punishing them. You're stepping back so they can hear what they couldn't hear when you were always there. The lesson isn't in your silence. It's in the contrast, the difference between how life felt with you and how it feels without you. When you're emotionally present all the time, people forget that it's a choice. They think your patience is permanent. They assume your empathy is endless. But the moment you stop feeding the connection, they notice the gap, and that gap becomes a mirror. A mirror that shows them what they've been taking for granted. A mirror that shows them who they were when they thought they didn't have to try. Emotional distance reveals what words can't convince them of. Teaching someone through distance is not about coldness, it's about boundaries. It's about preserving your energy when someone doesn't know how to respect it. It's about saying, I won't keep handing you pieces of myself if you're not holding them with care. Because if someone won't learn through presence, sometimes they have to learn through absence. And that absence teaches them that emotional closeness isn't guaranteed. It's earned, it's nurtured, and it can disappear if neglected. Emotional distance makes people sit with themselves in ways they didn't expect. When you were close, maybe they relied on your emotional labor. Maybe they vented to you, leaned on you, drew from your strength. But now they have to self-soothe. Now They have to answer their own questions. And that internal pressure is what starts to crack their comfort. It makes them realize just how much they depended on your emotional availability. There's a quiet shift that happens when you stop giving them emotional access. It's subtle at first. They think they're fine. They tell themselves they don't need you like that. But slowly, the weight of being alone with their thoughts starts to feel heavier. The comfort of your emotional support becomes something they long for. They replay the moments where you offered love, insight, patience, and they realize they don't know how to replace that. When someone feels your emotional distance, it challenges their ego. It makes them question their role in your life. Were they showing up for you or just benefiting from how you showed up for them? Did they give anything back or did they just take until the well ran dry? That's what distance does. It exposes one-sided dynamics. It pulls the curtain back on imbalance. And that discomfort is what sparks change if they're willing to face it. You can tell someone 100 times what you need, how you feel, what hurts, but sometimes they won't truly listen until your silence says it for you. Emotional distance strips away the noise. It removes the convenience of having you emotionally on call. And when that disappears, they start to understand just how much they relied on your presence to feel okay. It's not until they lose the emotional warmth that they realize how cold they were being in return. Distance isn't about walking away. It's about stepping into your own power. It's about saying, I'm not available to be misunderstood anymore. And in doing that, you give them a choice: evolve or be left behind. That space you create is where the lessons sink in. It's where emotional laziness meets a wake-up call. And whether or not they change, one thing is guaranteed: they won't forget the moment they lost emotional access to someone who truly cared. There's a quiet power in not reacting, in not chasing, not begging, not explaining yourself over and over again. Holding your ground is not about being stubborn. It's about being self-respecting. It's the choice to stay centered when everything in you wants to reach out for closure, clarity, or connection. But every time you hold firm, you remind yourself that you are your own anchor. You stop giving your power away to someone who couldn't see it when it was freely offered. And that kind of restraint isn't weakness. It's strength in its most mature form. When you refuse to lower your standards for temporary attention, you begin building the foundation of real self-worth. Anyone can chase validation. Anyone can act from fear of losing someone, but it takes something different to sit in the discomfort and still choose yourself. That decision doesn't always feel good in the moment, but it plants a seed that grows into confidence, into self-trust, into emotional stability. Because you're no longer reacting to the fear of loss, you're responding to the truth of your value. Your dignity isn't found in how someone treats you. It's found in how you respond when they don't treat you well. When you hold your ground, you're saying, I know what I bring. I know what I deserve. And I'm not negotiating that just to feel chosen. That's a boundary, not a wall. It's a message to yourself more than anyone else. It says, I trust myself to walk away from what doesn't serve me. And with every step you take in that direction, your dignity grows stronger. The moments that test you the most are the ones that shape you the most. It's easy to feel strong when things are clear, when someone meets you halfway. But the real test is in the silence, in the ambiguity, in the moments when you want to fold just to feel seen again. Holding your ground in those moments teaches you who you really are, not just in theory, but in action. Because strength isn't just what you feel. It's what you practice when no one is clapping for you. Every time you don't send the message, don't make the call, don't bend your boundaries to accommodate someone else's inconsistency, you build a little more power. You become less reactive, more rooted. You stop needing validation from the outside because you're finally validating yourself on the inside. That's when the game changes. That's when people feel the shift in your energy. Not because you're being cold, but because you're being clear. People respect what you respect. And when you respect yourself enough to hold your ground, you set a standard. Maybe they don't meet it. Maybe they never did. But you don't lower it just to make someone comfortable. That's not cold. That's clarity. That's knowing your peace is more valuable than temporary connection. And the more you act from that place, the more magnetic you become, not just to others, but to yourself. Inner strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to not engage, to not reply, to not chase after a version of someone you created in your head. Holding your ground teaches you to let reality speak for itself. And when you do that, you stop being led by emotion and start being led by truth. You realize you'd rather be alone with your peace than together with your pain. That realization doesn't come overnight, but it's the beginning of real empowerment. Every time you say no to what isn't good enough, you're saying yes to the version of you that knows her worth. And even when it hurts, even when it's lonely, you know you didn't abandon yourself. And that knowing becomes a kind of inner dignity no one can give or take away. It's built decision by decision, boundary by boundary. And each time you hold your ground, you add one more brick to the foundation of the life you actually deserve. Time is the one thing people can't fake their way through. In the beginning, anyone can say the right words, make the grand promises, and play the part. But what happens after the attention fades, after the excitement wears off, after you stop doing all the chasing? That's when you find out what's real. Because time doesn't just show you how someone starts, it shows you how they stay. It's not about the first message, the first date, the first compliment. It's about what happens when you stop making it easy. You can't always tell someone's intentions at the beginning. They're often wrapped in charm, comfort, and convenience. But give it time, and their patterns start to show. The effort either remains or fades. The consistency either strengthens or cracks. And in that quiet unraveling, you begin to see who was genuine and who was there for what you could give. Time has a way of stripping away performance and revealing motive. You just have to be patient enough not to interrupt the process. The truth is, anyone can seem interested when it's easy, when you're available, when you're pouring into them. But time asks a different question. Will they keep showing up when you stop carrying the connection alone? Will they still reach for you when you stop making all the effort? That's when you start to see if it was connection or convenience, if it was real emotion or emotional dependence. Time doesn't hide. It exposes. Sometimes you want the answer fast. You want to know where you stand, what they feel, how they see you. But real clarity doesn't always come on your schedule. It comes through the passage of time and the absence of pressure. It comes when you take a step back and let their behavior speak without your influence. People will always reveal themselves when they no longer feel they have to impress you. That's when the mask drops. That's when the truth steps forward. Time reveals who's consistent versus who's only committed when it benefits them. Because anyone can care in moments, it's who cares in patterns that matters. When you stop texting first, do they notice? When you stop over-explaining your needs, do they start asking questions or go silent? That gap between what they say and what they do grows clearer the longer you give it room to stretch. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Your absence becomes a test of their emotional memory. Do they remember how it felt to be around you? Do they miss the depth you brought to their life? Do they try to reconnect, or do they move on like nothing ever mattered? Time pulls all those answers to the surface, not because you forced it, but because you allowed life to speak instead of trying to control the conversation. You stopped interrupting the natural process of revelation, and in doing that, the truth had space to emerge. Some people fade the moment the energy is no longer centered on them. They didn't want you. They wanted the version of themselves that came alive when you were giving. Time reveals that. Others rise when given the chance. They remember, they reflect, they reach. Time reveals that too, but you can't rush to find out which one they are. You have to give the silence time to do what your words never could. When you're no longer in their life every day, time becomes the messenger. It carries your absence into their routine. It amplifies the space you left behind. And over days and weeks and months, they either fill that space with distraction or they feel it, truly feel it. Time is neutral. It doesn't punish or reward. But what it does do is bring out whatever was always underneath, waiting to be seen. Silence can be louder than anything you've ever said. When you stop explaining, stop reaching out, stop trying to fix or clarify, it creates a space that speaks for you. The absence of your voice becomes a reflection of the presence you used to bring. And in that absence, the other person is left with their own noise, their guilt, their confusion, their denial. Silence isn't emptiness. It's everything you could have said but chose not to. It's not passive, it's intentional. And the moment you withdraw your attention, it sends a message they can't ignore. When someone is used to your presence, your check-ins, your energy, they get comfortable. They rely on it, even if they don't consciously realize it. But when you go quiet, when you stop showing up the way you always did, it disrupts that comfort. They start to notice the missing pieces. They may not admit it, but they feel it. And that space you create starts to echo louder than any confrontation ever could, because silence doesn't argue, it reveals. Withdrawing attention doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've decided to stop giving where there's no return. You're no longer investing in someone who didn't value the gift of your presence. And it's in that withdrawal that they start to reflect. Maybe not at first, maybe not even consciously, but eventually the quiet gets heavy. The stillness begins to say everything they once dismissed, and suddenly your silence becomes a mirror they can't avoid. People underestimate how powerful it is to remove your energy, especially when your energy was something that made them feel seen, understood, and supported. They thought it was endless. They thought you would always be there, always available, always forgiving. But silence teaches them the cost of their assumptions. And once they feel the reality of your absence, it's no longer theory, it's real, and it's loud. Because now they don't get the access they used to take for granted. When you stop feeding the connection, the hunger starts to grow. They feel the void where your effort used to be, the space where you once held the emotional weight for both of you. And now that you're not carrying it, they start to feel just how much you were doing. Silence brings their emotional dependency into focus, not because you wanted to hurt them, but because you were done hurting yourself. And in that shift, the power dynamic changes completely. Attention is a currency. And when you stop spending it, people realize what it used to buy them. Your reassurance, your time, your empathy. They didn't notice it when it was flowing freely, but they feel the drought deeply. That's the thing about silence. It reveals value by removing it. And when you stop speaking, it forces them to listen to everything they've been ignoring. Not from your lips, but from the space you left behind. You don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes it's your absence that does all the talking. The quiet becomes the consequence. It becomes the reminder, and not the kind you deliver with resentment, but the kind that speaks from peace. Because when you no longer need to be heard to feel strong, you've reached a place they never expected you to go, a place where you no longer seek closure from them, but find it within yourself. And that kind of silence is unshakable. They'll replay conversations in their head, wonder why the calls stopped, question why you're not reacting anymore. That's what silence does. It creates questions. It forces reflection. And whether they ever say it out loud or not, they feel the difference. They notice that the emotional engine isn't running like it used to. And when attention disappears, what's left is the truth they tried to avoid.